Well, hey, Sierra Youth Online, I'm so glad that you have joined us tonight. If you don't know me, my name is Rhea, and I'm the Sierra Youth Worship Lead. And like I said, I'm really glad to see you tonight. It's going to be an incredible night. We have an awesome message from the one and only Joey King, and you're not going to want to miss that. But just wanted to let you know that you don't have to miss out on any part of an in-person Sierra Youth service just because you might not be able to make it tonight. So make sure you check out the Spotify link below, down here, because my favorite part of Sierra Youth is worship. Obviously, it's kind of part of my job. I love it. But you don't have to miss out just because you don't have your friends next to you, just because you don't have a band in front of you doesn't mean you can't worship. So make sure you check out that link below. It has all of our songs. You can jam out in your car. You can worship God wherever you are. So make sure to check that out. And the other favorite part of Sierra Youth is small groups, and you don't have to miss out on that either. So make sure you send a text to your small group leaders or your Sierra Youth pastor, whoever can get you connected to your small group later on after the message, so you don't have to miss out on any part of what makes Sierra Youth. So I'm so glad that you have hopped on tonight. Make sure you stick around. You're not going to want to miss it.
Well, what's up, CR Youth? My name is Joey King. I'm one of the youth pastors here, and I want to start our time off together by saying this, that there are two types of people in the world. There are normal people, and then there's those people that have like 4,000 emails, 150 unread text messages, and like 56 unopened Snapchats. Yeah, those types of people drive me nuts. When I see those home screens that just have red notifications everywhere, all I get is anxiety. And one of my friends, Jessie Golnick, who's over at the Egan campus, her phone looks just like that. I mean, this is a picture of Jessie's phone. I mean, look at all of these notifications. If I had this phone, it would drive me nuts. And I would be on a mission to get rid of every single notification as soon as I can. And so if your phone looks anything like Jessie's phone, let me ask you this. Why do you have a phone? I mean, honestly, this is not how you should use your phone. Like, it would be easier for me to write a letter to Jessie to get a hold of her instead of trying to email her or text message her in the middle of all of that. And so that just stresses me out. And if you look at my phone has very little red notifications because I have all of my notifications turned off besides text, phone calls, and emails. And I do that intentionally because when I have a phone that just has all these notifications, it just stresses me out. But sometimes what happens is I get text messages from people that I'm not ready to respond to. And I want to respond to them, but just not yet. So what I do is I leave those notifications unchecked. But eventually I do have to respond to those texts. And so I kind of live in this constant limbo of I hate those red notifications, but at the same time, I don't want to talk to that person. You see what I'm saying? And if you're like me, you know the feeling that I'm talking about. You know that it can feel overwhelming. And usually what happens is as soon as you respond to one text, another text comes in. And as soon as you respond to that one, another one comes in. And it can catch up to you, and it can be hard, and it feels like this constant cycle. And as I think about this, I think that it's actually really similar to what it's like in our relationship with God when we have doubts and we have questions. Because what oftentimes happens is there's a question that pops into our head, and as soon as we answer that question, another question pops into our head, and as soon as we answer that one, another one comes, and we're not quite ready to deal with that yet, so we stick it in the back of our mind, but eventually we deal with it, but as soon as that one's dealt with, another one comes, and it's this constant cycle, and it feels like there's no escape. And maybe you can relate to what I'm talking about here. And if you do have doubts, if you're somebody that has questions and doubts in your relationship with God, let me first be a voice that says that's normal. That's called being a human. I struggle with doubts as well. And maybe some of the questions that you're asking are something like this. The question, are you asking, is God really real? Or maybe, does God really love me? Or am I really forgiven? Or why hasn't God healed me? If you're asking any of those questions, or maybe questions like that, again, I want to just say that's called being a human. That's called wanting a relationship with God and understanding that God is so much bigger than we can understand and that we can comprehend. comprehend. And as a pastor, I've had people that have said to me, Joey, what's it like to not have any doubts? What's it like to not have questions in your relationship with God? And when people ask me that, I look at them and I say, I don't know. Like, why don't you go find somebody that doesn't have doubts and doesn't have questions? Because I can speak on behalf of myself, and I can speak on behalf of our entire youth team when I say that every single one of us, all of our youth pastors, there's been times in our lives when we have doubted and when we have questioned God. That's part of being human. But what you can learn about our story is that we didn't let the doubt win. We didn't let our doubt become greater than our faith. And what you need to know about faith is that faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the way that we overcome our doubt. Faith is not the absence of our doubt. It is the way that we overcome our doubt. And as we look throughout the Bible, there are people all over the Bible, story after story of people that doubted God, that were a part of some incredible movements that saw God do some of the most insane things ever, but in the very next moment, it seems like they're questioning and they're doubting God. And just to share two quick examples of that, the first one is this guy named Thomas. Thomas was this follower of Jesus who walked with Jesus, talked with Jesus, and knew Jesus. And when Jesus died and Thomas heard that Jesus had risen from the grave, Thomas doubted. And he said that I won't believe that Jesus is alive unless I see him with my own eyes. So that's Thomas. He doubted. Another example is Abraham and Sarah. Abraham, he's known as the father of our faith. He was the first guy in the Bible to really trust and really believe God with everything in him. And him and his wife Sarah are told that they're going to have a baby at a really old age. And their response to God is they laughed at God. And so this is another example of two people who loved God but doubted him. And so what I'm trying to show you here is that these real people with their real stories, they doubted God. And these are both people that loved God with everything in him, but still they found themselves questioning and found themselves doubting. And so I'm trying to show you that as humans, it is normal to doubt. And actually, our doubt can lead to our faith growing. Our doubt can lead to us knowing Jesus more and becoming more aware of who he is. And today I want to tell a story in the Bible about a man named Peter who this kind of was his story, that he questioned and he doubted and he denied and he had fear and he had all these different factors that led him to really deny his faith. And so we're going to look at that story. But before we do that, I just want to give you a little bit of a background of who this guy is. And so he is a guy who followed Jesus, that was with Jesus for most of his earthly ministry, that saw some of the most incredible miracles in the world, that was just a part of some of the most special and insane things ever. He saw Jesus with his own eyes. He knew Jesus personally. And so I want to make sure that you know that Peter and Jesus, they're like best friends. They're homies. They're ride or dies. They were together because this guy that I'm going to tell you this story, he was not some random guy that just walked off the street and happened to meet Jesus, but actually a guy that knew him so deeply. And so we're going to look at this story, and it's found in a number of the Gospels, but we're going to focus on the Gospel of John. So what's happening is Jesus gathered Peter and all these other disciples and followers to have a Last Supper that's most famously known as the Last Supper. And maybe you've heard of it, but basically what Jesus was doing is he was saying, all right, guys, I'm about to be arrested. I'm about to be put on trial. I'm about to be killed, but I will raise from the grave 3 days later. And so after Jesus has this big speech, it's kind of funny because Peter, he stands up. And he almost acts like he didn't even listen to Jesus at all. And he's like, hey, Jesus, I'm willing to die for you. I'll never let any of that happen. It's kind of funny because in the beginning of this story, Peter right away is already doubting Jesus. He's doubting that what Jesus just said was going to happen was going to come true. And Jesus, I can almost imagine him just like smirking a little bit and then looking at Peter and saying, Peter, before the rooster crows 3 times, you are going to deny that you even know who I am. And when Peter heard Jesus say that, his heart probably sunk into his stomach because that was the last thing he wanted to hear. And he thought to himself, there's no way There's no way I could come to a point that I would deny that I even know who this man is. But as we're going to see, because of a combination of things, because of his fear, because of his lack of faith, because of peer pressure, Peter comes to a point where he doubts and denies Jesus. And so if we're fast forward the story a little bit, Jesus, he's in the garden and he's getting arrested by the Roman officers and he's taken away to be questioned. And Peter, he kind of follows at a distance and he comes to the point where you can go no further because Jesus has been brought inside. And as he's standing around, there's a servant girl that comes up to him and says, I'm pretty sure I saw you with that Jesus guy. And Peter looks at her and says, no, not me. No, I think you're getting me confused with somebody else. I got a really memorable face. I get this all the time. But no, I don't know that Jesus guy. And a few minutes later, somebody else comes up to Peter and says, surely you're one of his followers. You look like him. And again, Peter's like, no, not me. I know I get this a lot, but I don't know that Jesus guy. I don't know him at all. Never heard of him. And just a few minutes later, somebody else comes up to Peter and says, I saw you with Jesus. And now Peter's starting to get frustrated. And he says, no, I don't know who this Jesus guy is. And right when he denies Jesus for the third time, the rooster crows. And when Peter heard that sound, it was almost like he had a flashback, like we see in the movies, where he flashed back and he remembered the words that Jesus said to him. Where he remembered that Jesus had said that he was going to deny him 3 times. And that moment must have been one of the hardest moments of Peter's life. That in a moment of peer pressure, in a moment of having to provide an answer on the spot, in a moment filled with fear, Peter doubted that Jesus would come through. He doubted, and he didn't have the faith. And that was a really hard spot for Peter to be. And like I said, this Peter guy, he was the same Peter that saw Jesus do miracle after miracle. The same Peter that was there when Jesus healed blind eyes and opened deaf ears. The same Peter that watched Jesus walk on water. The same Peter that actually himself was invited by Jesus to walk on water. The same Peter that saw Jesus raise a dead man and bring him back to life. This is the same Peter that saw these miracles. But for whatever reason, Peter doubted Jesus. In a really hard position, he made a choice to deny that he knew who Jesus was. And I wonder, have you ever been there? Are you someone who has an incredible relationship with God? Are you someone who knows Jesus, that follows Jesus, that goes the Jesus way, that wants to honor him with your life, but in a moment of weakness, in a moment where maybe your friends were questioning you and questioning your faith, or maybe in a moment where you were scared and you didn't know what was coming and you didn't know the answers, you doubted. Have you ever been there? Because if we're being honest, I could raise my hand and say, yeah, I've been there. And it can feel like a really impossible place to be, a place that none of us want to be. But because we're human, sometimes that's exactly where we find ourselves. But the good news for you and for me is that's not where the story ends. That's not where Peter's story ends. And so we're going to pick that story back up. And so what happens is Jesus, he goes and he dies on that cross. And then 3 days later, he raises from the grave. And him and Peter, they have not had an opportunity. They did not have an opportunity to talk about the fact that Peter had denied him, that Peter had doubted him. They didn't get a chance to talk to that. Jesus was a little busy, like going to the cross, dying for our sins, beating death and all that. So they haven't had a chance to talk. And I don't know about you, but if I was Peter, I wouldn't be like super eager to go and talk to this Jesus guy. Like I wouldn't be like, hey, I doubted you, like we should chat. No, I would probably be avoiding him as much as I can. And so what's interesting is that Peter, he doesn't really make much of a move. He doesn't like seek Jesus out, but Jesus actually makes the move towards Peter. And so here's what happens is that Peter and some of his friends, they get together and they decide they're going to go fishing one morning. So they get out on the boat and they're fishing and they see a person out on the beach. And the person calls out to them. And when he called out to them, Peter realizes that it's Jesus. And so Peter, he jumps out of the boat. He swims to shore. He gets to Jesus. And there's no moment where Peter gets down on his knees and says, Jesus, I'm so sorry for doubting you. I'm so sorry for denying you. I'm so sorry that in a moment of weakness, I failed you. No, that doesn't happen. But instead happens is they have breakfast together. And I want to hit pause on this story here just for a minute. Is the weirdest part of this story is what they have for breakfast. Jesus tells them to go grab some of the fish that they just caught and eat that for breakfast. To me, that is the weirdest thing that he could have said to have for breakfast. Like, he's Jesus. He's God. He could have snapped his fingers and they had eggs, bacon, ham, hash browns, all of it. Could have been there in a second, but instead they have fish. And it is so weird to me. But I just wanted to acknowledge that, and we'll move on with the rest of this story. So they finish having breakfast. And once they're done having breakfast, Jesus turns to Peter and he asks him 3 questions. 3 questions to make up for the 3 times that Peter denied Jesus. So let's check this story out in John 21. It says this. Jesus asked Peter, Peter, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, Peter replied. You know I love you. Then feed my lambs. Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, Peter, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know that I love you. Then take care of my sheep, Jesus said. A 3rd time he asked, Peter, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a 3rd time. He said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said, then feed my sheep. And as this conversation comes to an end, Jesus extends an invitation. He extends an invitation to Peter, and he simply says, follow me. And what I want you to see from this story, what I think we can learn from Peter, is I believe what Jesus was doing in that moment is he was restoring Peter. He was forgiving Peter for the fact that he had denied him and that he had doubted him. And he was saying, okay, Peter, I have so much more in store for you. This isn't the end of your story. And by that invitation to follow him, I believe what Jesus is saying. He's saying, Peter, I know that you love me, and I want you to follow me. With all of your fear, with all of your questions, with all of your doubt, I want you to follow me. And that's exactly what Peter did. And in fact, Peter, he went on to lead the church and perform miracles himself and to lead thousands of people to Jesus. And I believe what Jesus was saying to Peter is the same thing that he's saying to us tonight. That he is extending an invitation. That even when we doubt, even when we question, even when we're peer pressured into giving an answer that maybe isn't what we actually believe in our hearts, Jesus is saying, follow me. Because what I think we can learn from this story is this, is that even when Peter doubted Jesus, Jesus never doubted Peter. Even in the middle, when Peter is emboldened enough to say that he knows who Jesus is to a servant girl, Jesus isn't standing there doubting him. He's not mad at him. And that's the same thing that goes for you and for me. Is that even in our biggest doubts, even in our biggest questions, even when we maybe don't have all the answers, Jesus is not doubting us. And he's not mad at us. But in fact, he's standing there with his arms wide open, saying, come and follow me. Friends, I know that doubt is hard. I've been there. I've lived it. And I remember right before I was supposed to leave for college, my freshman year of college, I was struggling with doubt really bad, to the point where I almost walked away from the church completely. I would stay up late at night trying to find answers to the questions that I had, and I just couldn't find them. The feelings were overwhelming. The anxiety was rising, and I just didn't know what else to do. I talked to people, and they just didn't seem to have the answers that I was looking for either, and it was a really hard place to be. And I almost came to a place where I just threw up my hands, and I said, you know what? I'm done. I'm walking away. But thankfully, before I got to that point, Jesus met me. And I remember it very vividly. I was driving home in my car, and I felt the presence of God. I felt the real presence of God more than I had ever felt in my entire life. And it was in that moment that I made a decision. It was in that moment that I prayed a prayer that was something like this. That it was like, God, I don't know the answers. I know I have questions. I know I have doubts. And I don't know the answer to that stuff. But what I know to be true is that I want to follow Jesus. That Jesus is the one that I want to follow. And what was happening in that moment was that I was making a choice, that my faith in Jesus was bigger than my doubt. And I'm so glad that I made that decision, because it's the most life-changing thing that I could ever do. Because doubt can be a hard thing, but thankfully I didn't allow that doubt to overcome my fear. And so the question I have for you tonight is your faith bigger than your doubt? When it comes down to it, is your faith bigger than your doubt? Because I know we have questions. I know we have questions about how things work and what we're supposed to do and all this different stuff when it comes to following Jesus. But at the end of the day, is your faith in Jesus bigger than your doubt? Do you believe that Jesus is the one that he said he was? Do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? That he came to this earth for you and for me, and he walked on it and lived the perfect life that we could never live, and then died the death that we deserved? Do you believe that? Because if you do believe that, I want to encourage you, just keep taking a step. Because I know doubt is scary. I know there's times when we just want to give up and we want to walk away, and we just can't seem to find the answers. But at the end of the day, my encouragement to you is that in the middle of those moments, to just keep taking a step, to just keep following Jesus. And I'm not saying to just ignore the questions and ignore the doubt, no. Actually, I would encourage you to bring your doubt to God and to find people that you trust, like your small group leaders and your youth pastors and other people that can help you navigate some of those questions, and to ask them. And the hard thing is there's going to be times when maybe they don't have the answer either, because there's questions that we just can't understand as humans. Because God is so much bigger than our understanding. He's so much bigger than sometimes we can comprehend. But I believe that God wants to hear those questions. And he wants to hear those doubts. And that there's people that can help you navigate some of those things as well. So keep taking a step. Just keep following Jesus. Because I believe that our doubt can be overcome by a faith that is so much bigger. And maybe you're there already. Maybe your faith is already bigger than your doubt. Maybe it's not, but wherever you're at, I just want to encourage you, keep taking a step. Keep taking a step. So what's going to happen right now is I'm going to pray. And then once I pray, there's going to be a slide that comes up across all of our campuses with the question, what are the doubts that you need to bring to God tonight? Because I believe that each of us have doubts, and that God is not scared of our doubts. And there's going to be a time where you can simply reflect and process on what your doubts are, and to tell God what those doubts are. And then we're going to worship. And I believe God will meet you in a real way. So Jesus, I thank you. I thank you for these students. I thank you for these leaders. Thank you for this conversation. Father, doubt is a scary and hard place to live. But what we know is that above everything else, we're making a decision to have our faith be bigger than our doubt, and to trust you and to follow you. God, help us to be bold in our faith, to be bold in our walk with you. We love you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.